Well, Brian, here, since it's the holidays and we don't want to talk about anything stressful and problematic and etc., we thought we'd cheer ourselves up a little bit and the people to cultivate Cornette at the same time. You have done a little homework here because we were talking on one of the recent shows about the ages of the wrestlers and how that everybody thinks everybody's younger now than in the old days. And in actual fact, as Adrian Street would say, it's a t'other way around. The guys actually, as a whole, even the big money players were younger in the territory days. And you have done a little homework to illustrate that with the ages of everyone in that pivotal year of 1984. Mid-South Wrestling caught on fire. Dallas was still hot with the Von Erichs and the Freebirds. Vince was beginning his national expansion, blah, blah, blah. And there was a ton of major names in the business that were active on a full-time basis. So you have made that list, and we thought we would take a look. What it was the 20 people in their 20s right, that ought to be 86th or something, some list from some off-brand publication.
Yeah, we've done a few segments recently that kind of triggered the idea. One being the look at the 20 best wrestlers in their 20s. And when we were discussing that, it was kind of alarming how few potential stars, future star, current stars there are in their 20s. And that caused you to go look at Mid-South Wrestling in 84, which is why I stuck to 1984 for this example, and look at some of the ages on that roster. We've also been discussing who are main eventers on the current roster. Both companies have tons of wrestlers signed up. How many of them are main eventers? So again, it caused me to go back to 1984 and put together a list of everyone's ages, everyone in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and one in their 60s. Technically one teen. Tonga Kid should be on the teenager list. He wasn't yet 20 that year. But we could look at this, talk about this, and maybe you could put together your top 20 in their 20s for 1984, which is a real tough list.
Ugh.
That's tough.
Well,
the one they did in whatever it was, Bleacher Report or whatever, that was a nonsense list, but there aren't a lot of candidates. You look at 84, it's ridiculous.
Well, yeah, the list that we read showed the dearth, if you will, of, people that are truly already, I mean, there's a lot of people in developmental, but I'm talking about already experienced, already having been a proven business factor in a place, main evented major events that drew for the era. Certainly more people in 1984 on average for events, just not the same finances, but you get the drift. And, that's because guys that got in the wrestling business in those days, except if you had somebody transitioning from pro football, had already been a professional in one sport or another and then made the transition, they might start later. And occasionally, you'd get a guy in his mid-20s that Stan Lane started late, but he looked so youthful. But most of the time, guys were getting into business as soon as they could. And, teenagers or late teenagers and early 20s. And if you wrestled regularly in those days, you were wrestling literally 6 and 7 nights a week. So the experience that you got and working with a variety of different people, if you debuted when you were 19, by the time you were 24, you kind of knew what the fuck was going on pretty much everywhere. If you were any good or going to be any good at all. You had 5 years experience wrestling 300 times a year.
And another thing to think about as you start talking about this list, on the top 20 in their 20s for 2025 were, for instance, Daniel Garcia and Wheeler Yuta. You can't even imagine guys like that would exist on this list in 1984. It's a different kind of person, different look.
Yeah.
It's just a different breed of wrestler that were wrestlers back then.
The Daniel Garcia, and again, I'm not even trying to blister these guys personally. I'm just stating a fact, and anybody can go and look at video and see. Garcia and Yuta would be guys that were doing jobs on television, or like the guys that maybe Nelson Royal was going to train over in North Carolina to do some jobs around the local shows in the Carolina, whatever. There would have been no room. There's no look, there's no promo, there's no personality, there's no gimmick. There were hundreds of guys that would have been standing in front of them for all the territories.
Well, with that preamble,
yes,
why don't we talk about wrestlers who were in their 20s in 1984? Now, for this list, Jim, if you turn 30 in 84, I did not include you. You would be in the list of people who were in their 30s in 1984.
Right.
So again, minus my mistake, which was putting Tonga Kid here. He was 19. These are wrestlers in their 20s. And again, as we're going through this, mark off or state who you think would be in a top 20, and then we can kind of break it down from there. Barry Windham.
Well, and hold on one second. This is not, I just want to say one more thing. This is not a complete list of all the wrestlers that were wrestling in 1984, actually, because, there were still a bunch of others that may have slipped through the cracks here, but these are main names that would be recognized in a variety of places in the business at that time. Would that be fair for me to say?
Yeah, I guess you could say these were all stars or featured wrestlers of one kind or another in the business in 1984.
Yes.
It's a different business, just reading through the list, it'll tell you that. So, Jim, not in any specific order, but here are wrestlers who were in their 20s in 1984. Barry Windham, who was born July 1960. He was 24 years old.
Oh, good Lord. And he was already had been featured in Florida and was starting the first WWF run, right, in 84, and then came back down south. We've talked about Barry. He bounced back and forth between Crockett and the NWA and WWF for several years there, but he was already one of the best in-ring baby faces in the business. And in 3 years later, in 1987, he's 27 years old. Did he have the greatest Ric Flair matches with Flair wrestling anybody not named Steamboat? He was just, so smooth and incredibly agile and safe and never hurt himself or anybody else, but was doing all that stuff just effortlessly, just a natural. So he got to be he was one of the top 5 in-ring workers in the business a couple of years later. So he's got to be top 20 here.
And even in terms of kayfabe, in terms of a push, star in Florida, brief run in Mid-Atlantic, goes to the WWF, instant push with Mike Rotunda as a top tag team. Top babyface tag team. Jim, born July 1957, Bret Hart.
And Bret was just starting to get used on a national basis at this point, but he had already been in the business for about 7 years, I believe, maybe, a little longer, whatever. And obviously everybody knows Bret's pedigree. Bret Hart at this point in time was, he wasn't even a real main event level guy, but he was still featured and had worked, obviously, Calgary and was starting for Vince and had so much talent. Nobody can. So there's another top 20 guy, I would think, already with 2 out of 2.
All right, let me put that down. Bret Hart, 27 years old. Born January 1959, 25 years old, Brian Blair.
Brian Blair, 25 years old now. Now he's a politician of a variety of kinds. Brian Blair had been used in Florida, was a member of the Killer Bees with Brunzell. And what did they start in 84, 85? Excellent worker, good baby face. I don't think he's going to be top 20 on this list just because of this fucking list.
And actually, this age may not be correct. I see something else here that says he was born in 57, so still in his 20s, but this may not be completely accurate. Now I got to wonder about everything else on this list.
Oh, good heavens, it's your list.
It's my list. Jim, born in April 1957, which would have made him 27 years old, Brutus Beefcake.
Well, bless him, he was about to be a big star, but his in-ring to that point had been less than spectacular. And I mean, you know, Dizzy Hogan, Eddie Boulder, et cetera, but within a couple of years, he would be a big deal. Again, because of this list, I don't think he's going to make the top 20.
Here's an interesting one because you almost never think of him as, oh, that wrestler in his 20s. 25 years old, Buzz Sawyer.
Buzz, I've got pictures of him when he was 19 and he was almost bald. So he always, and he had that giant melon head. He always did. Goddamn, Buzz Sawyer in 1984 had already had the top run in Atlanta, the feud with Tommy Rich. Business-wise, had been featured in several different places. He'd already had a run in Dallas by that point, I think. And obviously in the ring, everybody knows he was goddamn almost one of a kind. He was just an asshole and a fucking drug addict. But besides those things, again, I don't know about a top 20, but we'll put a question mark.
All right, let me note that. Buzz Sawyer, question mark. Jim, born August 1961. Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert.
Eddie Gilbert, born 1 month before me. At that point, Eddie had main evented his first run in Memphis against Lawler, and then gone to, he was about to go, no, he was still main eventing that year against Lawler, the first run, but he'd been in the business. He started working outlaw shows in Arkansas where they didn't have a commission, or Missouri, Malden, Missouri, when he was still 17. And as soon as he turned 18, he could get a license in Tennessee. So he had 5 years experience at that point. He was about to go to work for Watts in Mid-South, end up booking down there, you know, Push Sting, et cetera, and then everybody's familiar with Eddie's career, you know, from then on. Again, he's not top 20 because when you see some of these names, but boy.
And again, we're speaking specifically about 84, so it's not like top 20 in 84, you know, how they were in 85 or anything. 84, he becomes Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert. He creates the gimmick when he comes back to Memphis, gets his first heel run. And that's, you know, kind of the beginning of Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert right there. So, not on your top 20.
Well, I know everybody's going to say, well, he's pissing on it. Wait till you see the rest of these names, folks.
Again, another one of those names that I hadn't even thought about. Yeah, he would have been on that list, top 20 in their 20s. You don't see anyone like this nowadays. Jim, at 26 years old, the Dynamite Kid.
And he wouldn't turn 26 until December of 1984. There's a top 20. Check him already. Revolutionized the junior heavyweight division in Japan, was one of the all-time most spectacular workers, was in insane physical condition until he had to blow himself up on the gas to go to work for Vince. But the 79 to 83 period, Jesus Christ, was there an athlete like that in the world, and the aura that he projected. And his shit looked like it killed you, and he could if he wanted to. But I've talked to guys that Danny Davis worked with, he'd never touched him. So, yeah, top 20. Dynamite Kid, for fuck's sake.
At 22 years old, born November 62, Davey Boy Smith.
And Davey Boy was about to, with Dynamite, 84, they were about to head to New York. Davey Boy's a question mark on a top 20, again, just because of this list, but he had already worked Calgary, Japan. They had a reputation, the Bulldogs as a team, and 22 years old.
At 26 years old, Mike Rotunda.
And we just talked about Mike here recently on a show, but he had already, this was before the varsity club. That would happen about 3 years later, but 4 years later, whatever. But he'd already been used in Florida as a baby face. He was an up and coming. He's not a top 20 guy at this point in 1984. But, what a talent.
25 years old, Paul Roma.
In Roma, looked great. I mean, if you went back and looked at Paul Roma's matches right now, with today's eye, he'd probably be one of the most solid workers in the business. But did he ever stand out to you compared to some of the other people on the list?
He did, but not in 1984. Again, we're talking about the very, very beginning of his career. He was used as an enhancement guy, mostly on TV or working the first match on, small shows. He wasn't yet in Power and Glory and everything else. At 21 years old, Samu. Samoan number 3.
Well, some people may remember him better as Samu and Fatu of the Samoan SWAT team. They had not been used at that point, but he's 21 years old. By, what was it? He and Fatu by 87, 88 were teaming.
88, yeah, they were in World Class with Buddy Roberts.
Yeah, and then came to WCW. So he's not a top 20 guy here, but he's 21 years old. He's already in the business. He's getting experience. In the next few years, he's going to be a main event guy in a number of places.
23 years old, born April 61, Steve Lombardi.
The Brawler. For longevity, he may be the number one guy on this list. But again, wonderful guy, good worker. Because of the class that he's in, he's not going to make that top 20 list.
Also born April 61, 23 years old, Terry Bam Bam Gordy.
Check. Where's your horn? No, don't do it. People are mad at you. Terry Gordy, at 23 years old in 1984, had already main evented the Superdome in Louisiana. The Freebirds drew tons of money in not just New Orleans, but all over the Mid-South Territory. They'd been on the Superstation out of Atlanta, been Georgia Championship Wrestling's top heel team. They'd gone and set Dallas on fire with the Von Erichs and was still there. And it was still drawing money. And within, next year or so would get to be one of the top foreigners in Japan. He was fucking amazing. There's no talent today like Terry Gordy was in 1981, much less 1984. When he was only 20, he was phenomenal.
Well, Jim, speaking of people who started as teenagers, again, I included him here. We'll just briefly mention him, although he's not eligible for the list. The Tonga Kid, born April 1965, famously sold out the Garden with Roddy Piper as a teenager.
And he was the stopgap measure when Snuka went sideways, right?
That's right.
And so he kind of stepped into a spot, but at the same point, he carried the ball there and people remember him. So I don't think he's top 20 in this list, but he was already a main event guy. He's 19 years old.
In terms of people who had a very interesting 1984, at 23 years old, member of the Midnight Express, Wendy Richter.
Wendy! She was an honorary member because she helped us against that nasty old hacksaw Jim Duggan. And then she was in the Garden, 6 months later or whatever?
No, like a month later. Like it wasn't
actually
6 months later.
It was that.
It was like a month later.
Yeah. Son of a bitch. As somebody actually sent a telegram back when you could do that kind of thing. I still have it. A telegram to, I think it was the TV station in one of the Mid-South markets, and they gave it to me at TV one day. And it said, grab your tennis racket and your can of ether. Your honorary member is fighting in the garden on whatever date. And one of the fans just, yeah, it was a cute little thing.
Does she go on a top 20 in their 20s for 84?
I think she has to, just because of the drawing position, the money drawing position. I mean, Wendy was not going to be, confused with Rhea Ripley in the ring, but she was probably the biggest name female wrestler of an entire generation.
It's crazy. I never thought about it until I put together this list. We'll probably talk about the 30s and the 40s and the 50s a little bit later, but there's only one name in the 60s. 61 years old, Fabulous Moolah. She's in a feud with Wendy Richter. It's almost a 40-year age gap. That's fucking incredible. I never thought of it that way.
Boy, howdy. And see, I'll tell you, I'd met Wendy in, 1980. So how old was she? So she was 19 when she was the Dallas Cowgirl, Wendy Richter. And I have pictures, not that kind of pictures. I have publicity pictures that I took when she came through. I think she worked with Moolah one night. And she really did a lot of work to drop some baby fat, as they say, between that point and 84. And she'd got where, she fit the fucking gimmick perfectly. But she had been working for a while.
Jim, another interesting name you never really think, oh, that guy when he was in his 20s, 26 years old, Arn Anderson.
Well, and everybody gives the picture of like wrestlers' baby pictures, and it'll be all baby pictures. And then there's Arn, like from the 80s when he was 30 or whatever. He'd never changed. I met Arn in the summer of 83. He had just started working as Arn Anderson. And that's when he and Matt Bourne had been a team until Bourne fucked up and left him floundering. And he happened to be on the card in Columbus, Georgia, the last night we were going to be in Columbus. And Dundee had all of the guys that were going back to Tennessee. They all ran in and Arn beat him up or did something or whatever. He said, he's the only one staying. So at this point, I think he was in Alabama, right? Getting his first kind of legitimate
teaming with Jerry Stubbs
push as a single. Well, I was going to say as a single, but he was teaming with Stubbs first. But 83, 84 had been the first time anybody really used Arn. So that's a tough one because it would be another year before he would really get a main event push. But he was already so good.
I mean, he would definitely he would definitely be on your list for 85, right?
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. It's just if you're sticking to 84, was he there at that point? But I'm putting a question mark down because he may well be when we finish.
Jim, born June of 62, 22 years old. Brad Armstrong.
22. And again, Brad was always good. And in, 80 and 81, he was just so darn skinny. But then he really started working out. And by the mid 80s, he looked so phenomenal physically. His work was so smooth. All the guys wanted to work with him. Everybody loved him as a worker. He had gotten pushes in Alabama and Georgia and Knoxville by that point in time and was in main events. He didn't draw the money nationally that a lot of these guys would go on to do. But goddamn, he's so fucking good. I think, do you have to put him on the list?
And again, in 84, 84, he had a good little run in Georgia, right, with the Mr. R thing with Tommy Rich.
Yeah.
He was used pretty good. Is he in the top 20? Again, I guess if you were making this list in 84, you're kind of projecting what you think 85 or 86 could be. Do you want to put him on the list or put him as a question mark?
Well, let's put a question down there. Check question.
Okay, Brad Armstrong, question mark. Boris Zukov, 25 years old.
He was still Jim Nelson, wasn't he?
In
He'd been Jim
84,
Nelson
yeah.
in 83.
That's right. I guess
So
he may have still been. I'm not exactly sure, actually.
So he'd go on to be a different person, but for the sake of this list, he didn't actually exist yet.
26 years old, and I guess you could argue 1984 was the year the world discovered him, the world of wrestling. Bobby Eaton.
Well, I think it's no secret. I would have put a check mark here, but if we're going by 1984, he's part of the team that drew record money in one of the largest territories in the country. So that applies. And again, he's another guy. Everybody wanted to work with him because he wouldn't hurt him and he made him look like $1 million. And it was a night off. And so in the ring and the respect from peers and drawing money. I think Bobby Eaton's a check mark.
Also from the 84 Mid-South roster, 23 years old, Buddy Landell. He would turn 24 in August.
Boy, Buddy, he was just starting to get used in Louisiana in 84 with the thing with Butch Reed and being the, Eddie Haskell to Butch. Watts loved him. Dundee loved him. Dusty loved him. Between 83 and 85, Buddy not only was a phenomenal worker, he was in shape, he could fucking talk, and everybody was wanting to use him. And his shit looked phenomenal. And then he lost control of himself.
But if you didn't know that was going to happen, I think you could argue, notwithstanding 1985, 1984 was kind of the year that Buddy Landell became a star, and everyone's like, this is a future star.
And so I think you have to put him on the list of 1984 because if he hadn't done to himself the things he did to himself, he would have been figured into the Crockett run in the 80s and he would have been used on top.
Jim, at 26 years old, Kurt Hennig.
And here's another name. I mean, my God, Hennig he turned pro. He was still a teenager, right? He was so thin, so painfully thin.
He was in the WWF. When was the first time? Was it 81 or was it 82? 82, I guess we could say safely.
Yeah, but he had started working before that.
Yeah.
Obviously, he would go on to, within the next few years, be another guy that was in the running for he's the best in the business in the ring, etc. In 84, he was still working for Vern, right? Was that the team with Scott Hall?
No, not yet. I think 84.
No,
I don't even remember if he did anything in Portland still in 84, but 84 was him and his dad against the Road Warriors is what I remember.
That's right.
So I think he was still teaming with his dad and doing stuff with his dad in the AWA.
I think obviously he's at least a question mark. Do you want to come back based on what he was doing in 1984?
Let me write that down. Kurt Hennig on the question mark list. Here's an interesting one for 84. 29 years old, Gentleman Chris Adams.
And he had already started the run with the Valets and Garvin and Sunshine and Precious and etc. in Dallas and was featured on national television. He'd only been in the country 2 years at that. Didn't he 81 or 82? He started in Los Angeles.
81, I believe.
So he's already a main event fucking guy. And actually that was 84 and 85, and that was as good as it was going to get, wasn't it?
Well, 84 too, he was, I think you could argue, the biggest babyface next to the Von Erichs. I would say he was probably more popular than Iceman Parsons at that point.
Yes.
And then he turned heel against Kevin, which kind of began, I guess you could argue, the best run of his wrestling career, him and Gino.
Yep.
So
Chris and Gino.
So again, 29 years old, but 84 is kind of the year that everything works out for Chris Adams.
Yeah. So he's a check mark.
All right. Let me put him on the list. Chris Adams. He's the oldest on the list so far. Think about that.
We got 9 people already, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 question marks.
Someone you know well from 84, 24 years old, Dr. Death Steve Williams.
Again, just the prospects, the recruiting efforts, all these territories, all these fucking names. In 1984, Doc had already been used as a babyface, not in the main events, but because he didn't start till 82. So 84 really was when Watts turned him heel and started really pushing him. And because of that, I think that's the upward momentum in 1984. He had been a babyface and he was already over. But then it was the match with Hercules Hernandez and Jim Duggan in New Orleans. Doc was the referee. I paid him off and he fucking turned on Duggan, switched heel, then the baby faces came in and shaved my head anyway. And then that was the trigger for the next year, Doc and DiBiase as a top heel team. Doc would go to Japan, blah, blah, blah. But he was getting his first major push in Mid-South Wrestling in 84. So that would definitely have to be a question mark at least, right?
I wasn't sure where you were going. Let me put him on the question mark list.
I'm thinking it, if not a check mark, I'm going to put a check and a question.
You brought him up before. 28 years old, Hercules Hernandez.
Jesus Christ, he was 28. Has there ever been since then, in the 40 years since then, Brian, a guy with that kind of body, ripped at that size and that weight, that could take backdrops and fucking big bumps like he did and move like that? It was amazing.
You know, when people like me first saw, after the fact, the television shows of Mid-South in 84, that was one of the big revelations was, oh my God, Herky, because you kind of knew him as a different guy in the WWF, even before Power and Glory, like 89, 90 as the babyface with the blue trunks.
Yeah.
He moved differently. He paced things differently. He wasn't as wild and action-packed. You see him in 84, he's one of the best. I mean, you could argue in 84, he's one of the best big guys in the business.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing. Hercules was so fucking big and cut and, energetic in his work and et cetera, and moved like that. And that was a calling card everywhere else in Florida, even in Mid-South with those big guys, he stood out. And he had been used. He was my bodyguard in 84. He was working the programs with all the top baby faces. But Vince's Land of the Giants, he got even bigger. Instead of being in Mid-South, I bet he had a 34-inch waist. I mean, it would he had bulk, but he had movable bulk. He was ripped and cut more and he looked physically phenomenal. After 5 more years, when he gets in the Vince mix and he's doing all the sauce that he's been doing, but now he's doing more of it, he was just thick everywhere and big to keep up with that crew, and that cut way down on his mobility, not only 5 years later, but another 40 pounds. That's why I say in Mid-South, he was easily 260 to 270, but with a fucking, like I said, a 34-inch waist or whatever. It was a whole nother thing when he got to be past 300 pounds.
So what do you do with him for this exercise?
For 84, goddamn. Oh, he was so good. Let's put a question mark.
All right.
Because we're running out of spots. Because look at the next name.
Well, the next name on the list, again, another guy you don't think of as being in his 20s, 29 years old, Jake the Snake Roberts.
And Jake had already main evented several runs in Louisiana, and he'd been in Dallas and a variety of places all over the country, and was within a year of starting for Vince. Yeah. He's already a draw, an attraction, and he's only going upward. I think he's got to be on the list, don't you?
I don't know.
Or on a check.
For 84, I don't know. Because again, he starts the year, he's a star in Georgia. He has the feud at Ron Garvin. The end of 83, he's in the Legion of Doom, but 84, he's in Georgia. Then he goes to Dallas, where he wasn't he wasn't the top heel as part of the group. He was kind of mixed in with Gino and Chris, but they were clearly slotted above him. I don't know.
Well, see,
85, he goes to Mid-South. 85, I think, is the year that Jake, like, you're like, oh yeah, this guy's a complete fucking star. But 84, I don't know if it was as apparent.
Okay, well, let's give him a question mark. But I remember he was also making shots for Mid-South when he was in Dallas in 84 because he was on some shows we were on. So he was still bouncing around in demand. But we will question mark it.
Another person from Mid-South 84, although he would move on and go to Memphis and then I believe end up in Florida by the end of the year, or at least early 85. 29 years old, Jim Neidhart.
The Anvil. I think he doesn't make the top 20 just because the list is so crowded. But again, in 84, he's tailor-made for Watts. He's already had the run in Stampede for Stu. But Watts loved a big, legitimate athlete like that. And he used him real well in 83 and 84. And then, as you said, he went on different places and ended up in working for Vince also. But in 84 wasn't necessarily everybody's going, Jim Neidhart, next big thing.
Well, here's someone who had a hell of an 84. He won the world title. 24 years old, Kerry Von Erich.
Yeah, he's kind of got to go on the list, doesn't he? The biggest fucking star of the year as far as the NWA and as far as being a babyface is concerned, and drew the record gate in the history of the wrestling business. So he has to kind of be there.
One of the most sought after people by Vince McMahon that he didn't get at that time was Kerry Von Erich. But also on the list here, Jim, 27 years old, Kevin Von Erich.
Boy, he was, again, had drawn nothing but money for the previous few years in Dallas. We've been talking about Dallas lately and how the Von Erich boys turned it around, where they were doing almost no money in that territory in the late 70s. Geez, does Kevin get on this list just because it's so crowded? And Kerry sapped a lot of his steam that year, but he's still a major fucking name. He's been to Florida. He had that run in Georgia in the early 80s. People had seen him on a couple of different nationally broadcast shows, Georgia and the syndication. Or, I mean, is he a check mark? This is getting crowded.
Again, I think Kevin is a candidate up until at least 85. 84, number 2 babyface, you could argue, to his brother. Big star, super over, has the feud with Chris Adams. I brought it up for Chris Adams, got to bring it up for Kevin Von Erich because it was a great feud. Had that big match at the Cotton Bowl where he gave Chris Adams, after he beat Chris Adams, like, I'm going to give you a chance, do the right thing. He come in and then Chris Adams super kicked him and kicked the shit out of him and hospitalized him. But I think if Kevin Von Erich is going to be on the list, I mean, 83 and 84, 83 is definite, 84 and 85, I might do it. I might.
Well, let's give him a check and we'll come back and count later.
Also, 27 years old, Coco Ware.
Coco started when he was, let's see, he started in 1977, so he was 20 years old. At that point, he had 7 years of experience. He had been a underneath babyface in Memphis, but then they used him on top against Lawler as a heel, managed by Jimmy Hart. He and Bobby Eaton were the Southern Tag Team Champions. But he had mostly stayed in Memphis at that point, and really he wouldn't get the national Birdman thing for a while yet. So I don't think Coco's a gimme for the top 20. But actually, it's amazing that his best years in the ring were, let's see, he was between 23 and 26, because once he left Memphis and went to New York, he never had another good match. But he was goddamn awe-inspiring in Memphis.
Just how good were him and Bobby Eaton live as a team?
Almost as good as Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey. It's just you didn't have Dennis to steer the ship, but Coco could do wilder things off the top rope sometimes than Bobby did. So it was a whole different kind of thing.
Jim, another interesting name that you never think of as being in his 20s. At 26 years old, the Barbarian, although he may still have been Conga the Barbarian at this point.
Maybe he was King Conga that year. Yeah, again, what a talent. And people remember him to this day. Incredible size, the way he could move. He's crowded by the names on the list. And at that particular point, I think he was never featured as a main event level guy on his own, but he was in a lot of heel factions. But yeah, I think he gets crowded off.
Jim, at 25 years old, someone you know well from Mid-South Wrestling, and again later in the NWA for Crockett Promotions, Crusher Khrushchev, Barry Darsow.
Who would also later on become the Repo Man and then Demolition with Bill Eadie.
That's right.
Smash. You know, this was the year he was getting his first push from Watts when he became a Russian sympathizer. And he was still, at that point, Crusher Darsow, but he was making the transition that he would then take to Crockett, Crusher Khrushchev. But boy, he was getting a push too. And Barry wasn't yet really a polished performer because he'd only been working a couple of years at that point. But I think he's crowded out because of the company here.
And friends, we will continue on with this list in a moment, but first, a very special message for you.
Boy, I tell you what, Brian, back in 1984, they didn't have the internet and the smartphones and the video games and all the things to keep you occupied, like on long car trips or long times in a dressing room. If I hadn't have been a boy, I wouldn't have had nothing to play with. But can you imagine how much fun that we would have had if we had the Raycon wireless earbuds? Then we could have listened to our music and our radio shows. We could have listened to Paul Harvey tell us the rest of the story back in 1984 on the Raycon earbuds. And have you heard about what's going on now? The new Raycon earbud, the Essential Open earbuds. You can play your music and still hear what's going on. Because the regular earbuds, Brian, they block out everything. You can't hear somebody screaming, "Hey, Brian!" or the car horn or the bread truck bearing down on you. But these sit just outside the ear canal. They're in an ear canoe in the canal. And you get the really clear sound, but you can hear what's happening around you. They're really light. The ear hook rotates so they stay in. They don't fall out. And again, the open ear design with the breathable fit and the multi-angular hook. They're very lightweight, but they still have the multi-point connectivity and the 36 hours of battery life. So now, for the holidays, you do not have to fear, Brian, being run over by a goddamn semi. When you're trying to run across the interstate with a big screen TV that you've stolen from Walmart on your back, you can hear the semi-trailer truck bearing down upon you.
Well, again, we don't want to encourage theft or anyone committing theft or running from the theft you committed. You're listening to anything with...
Well, you don't want to encourage people being run down, do you?
Why don't we focus on other examples? Imagine how much more efficient the Midnight Express would have been in 1984 if they had Raycon earbuds, didn't have to listen to you in the car.
You know, the Essential Open earbuds are here for the holiday season, and they're selling fast. Raycon audio products, ladies and gentlemen, are up to 20% off this holiday season. What you do is you go to buyraycon, BUYRAYCON, buyraycon.com/JCE Open. JCE Open, because they are the new open earbuds, not the classic everyday earbuds. JCE Open at buyraycon.com. You will save up 20% this holiday season, and you won't get run over by a truck. And think about it. If you're one of the people who, unfortunately, there was an epidemic of this several, I guess 20 or 30 years ago, a lot of grandmothers got run over by reindeer. You'll be able to hear the reindeer coming too. They honk like Buicks. They make that noise. You will not get run over like Grandma did this holiday season.
Once again, great earbuds, great gifts for people you love and care about. We all love them here in my house, and we're sure you'll love them too. Raycon, one final time, Jim, that promo code.
Buy Raycon.com/JCE Open.
Well, Jim, let's get back to this list as we compile the top 20 wrestlers in their 20s for 1984. At 20 years old, although he began the year at 19, Mike Von Erich.
Yeah. Well, there's no need to malign the poor fella, but no.
Another interesting one here, 25 years old, Michael P.S. Hayes.
He's got to be a check mark. I mean, at that point, the only difference between him and Gordy was a phenomenal worker and Michael's in-ring work was passable at best. But everything else about Michael, the ideas, the gimmick, the fucking promos, the aura, they did as much to bring rock and roll music to wrestling as anybody else. So, yeah, he's got to, and they'd drawn record houses in, again, Louisiana, Georgia, Dallas, sold out Reunion Arena, on and on. So I don't see how you can't, right?
I agree. Jim, at 24 years old, Marty Jannetty.
Marty was already a pretty good daggum worker. He'd been around for a couple of years at that point, but he hadn't really been, he was getting used in like the central states, Kansas City, whatever.
The Uptown Boys, him and the fake Tommy Rogers, Tommy Lane.
Yes. And so, not yet.
Here's an interesting one. 25 years old, Magnum TA.
Boom. This was in 83. He'd already been obviously used to some extent in Florida and Portland. But when he got to Mid-South, Watts made him and Wrestling 2 tag team champions in 83. And that ran until we got there and beat him for it, where then he immediately had TA win a program against 2 who had turned on him. And by the end of the year, Magnum TA's the North American heavyweight champion. He's working in the big shows with top guys. How can he not be a check mark? He was one of the most upwardly mobile guys of 1984.
Absolutely. Someone you think of when you think of Magnum, also 25 years old, Nikita Koloff.
Woo! Where? Shit.
We're a year away from him and Flair for the first time.
That was the 85 first Great American Bash in the ballpark in Charlotte, but this was the start of the build for all of that. Nikita Koloff didn't exist in the wrestling business before 1984, but he would be not only get a major push in 1984, but then end up being one of the biggest names in the NWA for the next 3 years, and then a variety of things. His career was curtailed early, but I don't think he can be. Can he be a confirmed check at this point in time? Because it's not 85, or does he have to be a question mark?
I think I would wait till 85 just because he was the biggest he ever was in 84, but he was kind of Uncle Ivan's secret weapon more than someone doing a lot yet. It's interesting, though, looking at this list and specifically the idea of what wrestlers were in their 20s then versus now. The guys who came out of Minnesota, who weren't the kids of wrestlers, none of them were like young. It wasn't like a bunch of 19-year-old kids getting trained by Eddie Sharkey. They were already in their 20s.
Yeah, well, no, they'd already had time to be bodybuilders and flunk out at football and become bouncers and realize that probably wasn't a great career path. And then about 23, 24 years old, boom, here we go. But you could tell, see, that was the divide in the locker room at that point. between the guys that had started when they were, as soon as they were legally able, as early as teenagers, the Gordys and Bobby Eatons of the world, and that had been fans and watched it, and they were the polished performers. But the muscleheads, as he used to call them, the guys from Minnesota, the guys with the bodies, the look, and it's been around since wrestling's been around. The freaks, the blimps, the weirdos, the muscle guys fit into the freak category at one point because there weren't that many of them. And when the Road Warriors hit and Vince started pushing Hogan, that became the thing. And then the guys with the bodies got chances. Dusty was smart. He could make something out of Nikita. Will tell you, he didn't know what the fuck was going on when he first got there. But Dusty took Nikita and in a year had 25,000 people in a ballpark to see him against Flair on the nation's birthday. And then he took Big Bubba, who is not even on this list because he hadn't even wrestled yet. But in 2 years, he'd see a job guy and give him a gimmick and give him a push. And within 9 months, he's, sold out Pittsburgh against Dusty, 16,000 people, and set a record. And he's working in ballparks. You could take the guys but for every Road Warriors tag team, there was a Big Al Blake, Vladimir Pietrov, or, the Master Blasters. All the bodies didn't work out. But if they had any concept and any talent, a good booker like Dusty or Vince or whoever the fuck could draw money with them.
Well, Jim, here's another interesting one. 24 years old, former protege of yours, the one-man gang.
Moon, the one-man gang, brother. He had already worked Louisiana, already worked, obviously, ICW for the Pafos is where he got started, and had worked in Memphis and then gone to Louisiana and then headed to Dallas. He was in Dallas when we got there at Christmas of 84, so he started that year, did he not?
He started
Or would he have started in 83?
No, he started in Dallas, I believe, in 84, and that's when he got the gimmick, because he had been one-man gang in 83 in Mid-South and got a big push with Akbar, but he still had the long hair and just kind of the big
long hair,
suit.
Beard, and, he had started out kind of like a Crusher Broomfield, just looked like a big hillbilly. But yeah, with that gimmick, so 84 was a year he's on World Class Wrestling. He's working with Kerry. He's managed by Gary Hart. He's figured into the reunion arenas and the Cotton Bowls. And that's at least a question mark, is it not?
Again, only 24 years old. That's what gets me there.
Yeah.
Jim, another name on this list that's interesting. He starts off as an undercard guy in 84 Mid-South, and he ends up as a heel with a push in Memphis. 26 years old, Rick Rude.
He was doing jobs on TV for us in December 1983, and by the middle of the summer, he's the Southern Heavyweight Champion working with Lawler on top in Memphis and become Ravishing Rick Rude. And does he make this list? Because at that point, that was the only thing he had done in 1984. Was work in Memphis, and they led him by the hand through that. But he's always my example of a guy who had all the tools, and if he went to the right places and worked with the right people and was trained by the right bookers, he developed from a babyface job guy to a heel on top in a small territory to a heel on top in a bigger territory with a gimmick, and then etc. So he's not on the 84 list, but he would be probably on an 85 or an 86 or an 87.
Another interesting name for you here, 26 years old, from the Rock and Roll Express, Robert Gibson.
How does he not get a check mark? the hottest babyface tag team in the business in Louisiana that everybody's hearing about. And Dusty and Flair won them for the Carolinas, which they, as soon as they left Louisiana, that's exactly where they went. They were even bigger. But 84 was the year that they exploded in Mid-South. How is Ricky and Robert kind of have to be checks, don't they?
Well, we'll get to Ricky shortly, and we can discuss if they should be individual checks or if you have to include them together. But another interesting one here, Jim. 27 years old. From the Legion of Doom, Road Warrior Hawk.
And let's go the next name. From the Legion of Doom.
From the Legion of Doom, he is 24 years old, a bit younger than Hawk, Road Warrior Animal.
The Road Warriors and the Rock and Roll Express in 1984. Again, Ricky Roberts started as a team in 83 in Memphis, but they weren't featured. Road Warriors started as a team in 83 in Georgia. Just, the story is out there. They were thrown out on TV when Matt Bourne fucked up, and Ole said, Sharky, give me your guys. And in 84, they were already major stars, Road Warriors, and starting to travel outside the territory. I think Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express, and Road Warriors in 84. Who had more upward momentum?
And you brought up Ricky Morton, so I'll say that here too. He was 28 years old, allegedly. In 1984.
There is, at some point, we have to get some type of FBI investigation going on the real legitimate age of Ricky Morton. But I just prefer to say he's timeless.
So what do we do? Do we put both the Road Warriors and the Rock and Roll Express together on the list, or do we?
You have to. You have to, but not. That's a good way to only take up 2 checks instead of 4. But Road Warriors and Rock and Roll Express in 1984 on a list of the top 20 guys under 20 in the business. Jesus Christ, how do you not?
All right, Jim, I'm noting that down. At 28 years old, former NWA World Champion Tommy Rich.
I don't think he makes the list because he was already too old. Think about this. Tommy Rich started in, I don't know the date of his first match. If it wasn't November or December 1974, it was January 1975. I know I saw what had to be one of his first 5 matches in person. And boy, howdy, for the first 6 months, you were like, what the fuck? Why are they doing this? And then he got with Tojo, and Tojo helped him. And from the summer of 75 through, goddamn, what was it? Probably the end of 70, first part of 77, Tommy was used as a tag team champion and a Southern heavyweight champion against Lawler and a tag team champion with Bill Dundee. And then Barnett heard about him, asked Jarrett for Tommy, and gave him that push in Atlanta, where obviously he got over so good. They put the belt on him for a week. Harley agreed to do that. He was 21 then. And then by 84, they've already done the program with Buzz Sawyer. I think 84 probably Tommy had more rental car accidents than sellouts. And he was his career was on the downward trajectory by 84.
Well, Jim, another name here from your future. At 25 years old, Tom Pritchard.
Wow. Tom had been in Memphis in 83, but in 84, I think he went to Pensacola, did he not?
And 85, he would end up in Mid-South, so I'm not sure if it was 84,
Yeah.
maybe.
I think he was in Alabama, then he was Mid-South. Not on this list at this time because it's too crowded. He wasn't getting used yet, but he was already a heck of a worker.
Here's an interesting one that I'm always surprised at. I noted it the other day when we went through some of the ages that he's older than I would have thought. 29 years old, young babyface Terry Taylor.
Huh. Terry Taylor in 1984 was fucking tremendous. And he was working in Louisiana, but Terry had been a good babyface since like 81 or 82 in Memphis. And Memphis was just so crowded with baby faces that could talk. Jerry Lawler and Jimmy Valiant, Bill Dundee, and Austin Idol whenever he was a baby face, and etc. And Jarrett liked Terry Taylor as the old school type, good-looking baby face. He still used him as Southern champion, but he never really worked on top in Memphis. But they did the same thing in Mid-South. Remember, Terry was the North American heavyweight champion and had that Superdome match with Flair for the NWA title. Great fucking match. Terry was always in shape. He was an excellent worker, and he was a good-looking babyface in peril. His promos were not anything to fucking do, dissertations on, but he was intelligent and well-spoken. He was perfect for an old style traveling babyface type of, U.S. champion or something like that, or a territory top babyface where the other top babyface was a hacksaw Duggan kick-ass kind of guy. So he had some balance. He had something for the guys and something for the girls. Terry Taylor, tremendous fucking picture seller, by the way. Good Lord. But he was, again, great in the ring, great at everything except promos, and that was okay. Carried himself well as a baby face, and then had that run as the Red Rooster and never meant another goddamn thing in the wrestling business. And boy, howdy, I don't know what to tell you.
But again, 84 were 5 years before he's the Red Rooster. It's a few years before he would ever turn heel. A year before he would be Mid-South North American champion, like you noted. If you look at him in 84, at the end of 84, would you have said this guy in the next 5 years is going to get a big push and be a big star for Crockett or somewhere else?
Well, actually, that's the thing. And Terry would go to work for Crockett for a while there, but I could see in 1984, I could see Terry Taylor being a top babyface in the Charlotte territory in the mix of NWA guys. He worked that style. But in 1984 in Louisiana, he was still kind of underneath Jim Dog. He was definitely underneath Dog when Dog was still there. He was underneath Jim Duggan, and he was underneath Magnum. So he don't make the top 20 list, I don't think.
All right. Jim, I know you were still at that point keeping up with everything happening all over the world that you can get on tape. So here's an interesting name for you. 26 years old, The Cobra, George Takano.
Well, and to be honest, I'm not going to take up a top 20 spot for him on this list because primarily we're dealing with Americans, although there's going to be some names on here. But goddamn it was a Tiger Mask opponent. And
well, he was kind
excellent.
Yeah, he was kind of what they used to fill in the blank after Tiger Mask, after the big scandal in 83 leading to 84.
But he worked with him first, didn't he? Am I blanking on, or am I having brain tumors that I've seen the Cobra against Tiger Mask, or did he come completely after?
Now you're making me question it. I thought he came after, but
he might have. But point is, excellent talent, good worker, and they used him. Inoki used him, but I don't think he didn't stand up to this class as far as worldwide superstars.
You brought this name up earlier. 27 years old, Matt Bourne.
Where was he working in 1984? Because he burned Ole in 83.
I believe he
Did he go back to Portland?
I think he was back in Portland, and then early 85, he would end up in the WWF. Briefly.
Yeah, the list is too crowded.
Here's another interesting name that would have later fame, and he was just starting out. 26 years old, Scott Hall from the American Starship.
And was he Coyote or Eagle?
I think he
Which was
Coyote.
Spivey.
I think Spivey was Eagle.
No, I think Spivey was well, nevertheless, they were actually, as a team, they were kind of just the shits. But you can't, yeah, I mean, Scott Hall would go on to be one of the biggest stars in the history of the business. But from 1984, you can't put him on a top 20 list in this company. He was not really doing that much in 1984.
Here's an interesting name. He had lit up the world as Tiger Mask. In 84, he had been Tiger King. Satoru Sayama, he was 27 years old.
Can you believe it? He'd already done the Tiger Mask gimmick, changed the fucking business over there, accomplished in the ring what he did, and dropped the gimmick and was on the downhill slide by the time he was 27. I mean, this guy's one of the greatest in-ring talents in the history of the business, but if we're grading on 1984, is it the same thing as Tommy Rich? He was almost done. He was on the downhill slide.
Yeah, I don't know if I would put him on the list for 1984. I agree with you.
That's just, there has to be some kind of, draw a line there and just, what the fuck? Because, and he chose in large part to get out of the business or get out of the mainstream business, do his own thing, pick his spots. So it wasn't like that his performance collapsed, but it was just an odd story where he was so great for such a short period of time.
Well, Jim, a few more names from the land of the rising sun. At 26 years old, Yoshiaki Yatsu.
Boy, you would remember better than I. How did they use him over there? I mean, I know he was a top guy and a name for a while, but was he revolutionary at that point?
He was really good. He was a part of the whole Choshu group. But I don't know if I would put him on this list. And here's another interesting one who, again, a few years later, it's a no-brainer. A year later, maybe even. But here at 25 years old, Akira Maeda. Now remember, in 84, he did a tour with the WWF as the, Shinma sent him over. And he was doing jobs for Rene Goulet. And that's why he hated American wrestling. They had him job to everyone in every small town.
Yeah, that's amazing. And he's a whole nother, there's another line with a what the fuck, because a guy that was that influential and still his success in this industry was short-lived but massive, but it wasn't yet in 1984. So he's a what the fuck.
You can maybe say that about the next person, although he did get a good
Jesus
push.
Christ.
At 27 years old, Atsushi Onita.
Onita, at that point in time, was the most recognizable name of the three we just mentioned in the United States, because at least he had worked Memphis and Texas and Florida. In 1984, again, he was going to try to become Baba's junior heavyweight star at that point, but wasn't it by 85 when he'd blown his knees and quit for a few years?
Yeah, I think it was somewhere around that period of time. He was gone for a little while, yeah.
But he's another what the fuck, because then he comes back and everything goes insane for a couple years until it melts down.
Here's an interesting name, Jim. He would turn 27 in August. Gino Hernandez.
Biggest push of his life in 84, wasn't it?
In Dallas, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, he's got to at least be a question mark. It's just getting so crowded.
Let me put Gino here as a question mark.
But yeah, I mean, he had been a teenage phenom. He was the U.S. champion. In Detroit, didn't Sheik put the belt on him? Or at least he was working with Sheik for it when he was 18, 19. Been a star in Houston. Had the run with he and Chris Adams against the Von Erichs in Dallas, which was going on at that point, or about to go on.
About to start, but, he returned at Texas Stadium. That was his return to wrestling after his sabbatical. And that's May of 84. So from then on, he had a pretty good sized push, and one of the he did the American. Yeah, I guess he was the America's champion, I believe, or it would have been
American, not
champion.
America's was Los Angeles. American was Dallas.
But he held something there, so he got a good push. Jim, another interesting name. He would turn 29 in November, and in 1984, he would be both King Kong Bundy and Boom Boom Bundy.
Bundy! Bundy, you big fat piece of shit. We bring you in here, we bring guys in to get you over, and what do? You dumb yourself right out of position. But that's Bundy had worked Mid-South in what, 83, and had already main evented in Texas. What was the name he used when they brought him into Georgia in 82? Crippler Chris Cannon. And he had hair. But he was 85 would be the run with he and Hogan. In 84, he was just starting up there, was he not?
Oh, no, he didn't even get up there until early 85. 84, he worked
didn't.
AWA, worked Memphis. He was a part of that whole thing with him and Rick Rude against Lawler and Randy Savage.
That's right. I forgot because we were gone. He came in afterwards. Boy, if it was 85, he'd have to get a check mark. Does he get a question mark here because he's up and coming, but it'd only been a couple of years. He just doesn't have the track record of some of these other guys.
I don't know. He's an interesting name. Again, it's one of those ones until you see it there, you don't think of him as being in his 20s in 1984, but he would fit. I don't know. We could return to that one. Let me make a note here. Bundy. Jim, at 28 years old, he would win the World Championship in 1984. Rick Martel.
Oh, damn it. Here's another guy in his 20s that's winning a major world championship this year. How can he not get a check? He had worked everywhere from Canada to the Pacific Northwest to fucking the AWA and
WWF or WWF. Him and Tony Gurria were tag champions.
WWF, he and Gurria had already been tag champions before the 1984 expansion. He's got to get it. Same thing as Kerry Von Erich, right? And we just talked about Martel was one of the better in-ring workers in the business. So he won the AWA title. Kerry won the NWA title. He's got to get a check.
I think the only thing that kind of stains his 1984 and maybe even his 1985 is his haircut. I think that's the worst thing about Rick Martel in those years. But Jim, back to this list here. A Rick Martel tag team partner in the future, 26 years old, Tom Zink.
Boy, howdy. Yeah, Tom, sorry, it's a little crowded in the club tonight. Maybe come back tomorrow. He may have been doing a few things at that point, but not much. And he wasn't ever really going to be put in a mover and shaker position.
This next one was a surprise for me. I didn't know he was still in his 20s. At 29 years old, he would turn 29 in June. Dr. D, David Schultz.
I first saw David Schultz wrestle when he was 20 years old. And he didn't look as fearsome and intimidating as he does to his modern look to most people, but he still looked like some kind of fucking guy you probably don't want to piss off. I mean, Schultz had already been used in the Tennessee territories since 76. He and Dennis Condrey were a team. He and Bill Ash were a team. He and Dutch Mantell were a team. He'd been tag team champions both for Goulis's office, for Jarrett's office, over in Southeastern Championship Wrestling in Knoxville. I believe at that point he had also worked. Didn't he have a run in Florida at one point, early 80s? I'm not sure.
Oh, I don't know.
I know that he, along with Condrey and Phil Higgerson, went to Nova Scotia for that fucking Al Zink in 77 because Schultz is the one that saved their life when they started a riot, Phil and Dennis, and the cops turned on him. And here came Schultz out of the locker room with a goddamn hockey stick, because with a hockey arena, spinning it like a helicopter blade, made a path for him, came to the ring, got him, and took him back. They grabbed their bags, got in the car, went straight to the airport. They were in the territory for 2 fucking weeks and came back to Tennessee. Anyway, Phil and Dennis were working with Ricky and Robert Gibson. That was Robert Gibson's first booking trip out of the country to go to Canada, and their fucking opponents left after 2 weeks because they started too many riots. Schultz in 84 is still in he had just switched with Hogan.
He was in WWF the entire year of 1984.
That was his year, and then March 85 was WrestleMania, and that was also when he slapped the shit out of Stossel. So Schultz at least gets a question mark here, and he'd worked Calgary for quite some time, and apparently was one of the people that Dynamite Kid didn't fuck with. So he's at least got to be a question mark at this point, because he's now working for the WWF against all of top names, including Hogan, who brought him there specifically.
And he was aligned with Roddy Piper, big push right out of the gate. Jim, 29 years old, former member of the New York Dolls, Rick McGraw.
Good Lord. It's just too crowded, isn't it? Poor Rick. And he'd die in, 2 years?
85.
Shit, 1 year.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Unfortunately. Well, look at the next name.
The next name, also 29 years old, or returned 29 in 1984, Jay Youngblood.
And when did he die? What year?
I think 85 also, right?
Yeah. He and Steamboat and Slaughter and Kernodle in Greensboro drew the all-time biggest crowd ever to try to see a wrestling match in the city of Greensboro at that point. They shut the fucking interstate. They turned thousands of people away from the Coliseum. In 1983, this is 1984, he's starting to become somewhat unreliable. I guess that was the problem with him, and Steamboat was completely different personality in terms of that. And Youngblood had died in 85, so you can't, unfortunately, put him on this list.
He showed up in Mid-South for, I don't even know if it was a month, but he was there in 84, briefly.
You know what? You're exactly right. And I don't even know if it was a month. I don't remember what happened, or if we ever knew. Yeah. He might have just left.
Well, Jim, also on this list, 24 years old, Brett Wayne Sawyer.
Well, he wasn't an asshole like his brother. He was actually a nice guy. The problem was he didn't get anything from his brother except the name. Because whereas Buzz Sawyer was a goddamn genetic freak that Brock Lesnar would envy in terms of the athletic shit that he could do and the fucking indestructibility of him, and the fact that he could master every goddamn wrestling move like a lightweight, poor Brett was just a pudgy younger brother. And he couldn't really talk, and he didn't have a physique, and his work was okay, but so was a lot of people's. But he was a lot nicer than Buzz.
Jim, at 24 years old, your good friend Bobby Fulton.
Boy, howdy. 1984, the Fantastics. That was their... Bobby and Terry Taylor had been the Fantastic Ones in Georgia in the summer of 83 briefly. But then when Dundee brought Bobby and Tommy Rogers in to be the Fantastics in Louisiana in 1984, that was their first main event run. We worked with them for the Mid-South belts, and they went to Dallas World Class and became... Who'd you say? Chris Adams was the most popular babyface except for the Von Erichs in 84. The Fantastics were in 85. And from looking at them, I think being in the buildings, in some cases, in some places, they were more popular than the Von Erichs to the fans there just because they were the regular fans and it was something different. The Von Erichs were still bigger draws. I'm not saying that. But those people loved the Fantastics because somebody else got pushed besides the kids.
And we should mention also, while we're talking about Bobby Fulton, Tommy Rogers, 23 years old.
Yes, and that's the thing. They're 23. Bobby would turn 24 in 84. Tommy would turn 23. and they're just getting started. So I think they're question marks because they weren't as revolutionary as the rock and roll since they came right after. But within a couple of years, not only would they be going to Japan 4 or 5 times a year, but they'd be working in in Crockett's territory against us, as well as Mid-South against the sheep herders, that big program. So for
all in their 20s.
Yeah, all in their 20s. Their entire 20s was the team.
Well, Jim, also on this list, someone I know you saw a lot of, at least on tape, 28 years old.
Yes.
Kuniaki Kobayashi.
I never went in person, but fucking Kobayashi again. The matches with Tiger Mask and the junior heavyweight division over there. Inoki, that was Inoki's calling card for about a 3 or 4 year period there. Tremendous worker. I can't judge him with these other guys because he wasn't featured in main events. He was the junior heavyweight division for Inoki was popular, but he wasn't like featured in main events in various markets that we have records on. And what's the promo situation? We don't know. It's apples and oranges. But he was a tremendous talent that shows that a lot of the major names in Japan were still young.
Well, Jim, looking at Mexico briefly, not that I expect you to be too familiar with some of these names, but El Hijo del Santo, 21 years old.
Well, I think I've heard of him.
Negro Casas. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, Hijo del Santo, he was 21 years old then. He's just now having his goddamn retirement match in Mexico City, the last one, apparently. But as a major worldwide name and because of his family relationship, yes, he deserves a check on the list, but he's still a different animal than some of the others we're comparing. Negro Casas.
That's right.
24. One of the best in-ring workers anywhere. Negro Casas could do lucha, but also could actually work with people where you didn't go, what the fuck is going on here? They're just fucking tumbling. He was a multi-style superstar.
A couple more names that were in their 20s. Atlantis was 22 years old, and MS1 was 28 years old.
I actually only remember one of his kids, MS-13.
That's not one of his kids.
Not sure about, but no Atlantis also would be one of the top names in the last 40 years of lucha, and he was 22 years old, rather. So, yeah, Mexico was in pretty good shape with young guys.
Jim, I'll give you both of these names together, although they're quite separate. You would see one a few years earlier in Memphis. At 24 years old, Jacques Rougeau, and at 29 years old, Raymond Rougeau.
Ray Rougeau was a tremendous worker in the ring. He came first because he was the older brother and drew more money in Montreal when that was still, back in the territory days. And Ray Rougeau was known more than Jacques was because he had more publicity. Jacques came along when he came into Memphis in 1982, so he was 21 years old because this was spring of 82. And they brought him in as a babyface. And I mean, he was good at that point, but he's still only in his early 20s. But I'll never forget, I heard the story in the locker room. After Memphis TV, I guess they're going to go to Nashville, and Jacques new in the territory. Somehow he ends up in the car with Lawler and whoever they were riding with. And Lawler's a booker at the time, right? And some way or another, they're talking, and I can't remember what brought it up, but Jacques, whether he made a pitch to do something with him or let him do this or that while he's in the car with Lawler, the booker, and Lawler, okay. And Jacques said to him, because this was the quote that went around, "What's the matter, big boy? You afraid they're going to get over you?" And it spread like wildfire that this fucking goofy French-Canadian 20-year-old fucking kid had just told lie. Wasn't he afraid I'm going to get over you in Memphis? So He was so annoying that Lawler switched him fucking heel. It said he had that personality and that accent and everything. It's a natural heel. He just annoyed everybody. So he switched him heel. And then that's when guys were starting to use music, and Lawler had music, and the Fabulous Ones, well, they weren't around yet, but a few people had music, not everybody. Jacques Rougeau wanted music. No, you're not a top guy. You don't get the music. He brought his own boombox. He would carry it to the ring in the arena with it turned up as loud as he could. Dirty Laundry. And it got so much heat that they kept it as part of a rock and roll Jacques Rougeau. And they kept it as part of his gimmick. They didn't play the music in the arena. He carried the giant boombox.
Did he get along with Terry Taylor when they teamed up?
I don't know, but it seems like that something about either one of those two would have probably irked the other one.
Well, Jim, only a few more names here on the list. 24 years old, Brian Adias.
Thank you, Brian, for coming. You get a consolation prize.
Also 24 years old, Kelly Kaniski.
I really liked Kelly. He was a nice guy. He was with us in Dallas, and he was one of those guys that just probably came along too late, because he looked a lot like his dad. His dad had the Buzz crew cut and no knee pad, boots and tights type of wrestler. And Kelly just didn't have any particular look to him or gimmick or anything like that. But also he had just started. He didn't get a chance to develop too much. And then the territories were gone. And I think he got into some line of business. And his brother Nick worked a couple of years shortly after that. At least Nick had some hair.
Jim, at 27 years old, Johnny Mantell. All right.
Hey, well, I mean, yeah, thanks for coming, Johnny. Yeah.
I will give you both of these names together, although, again, very different careers. At 26 years old, Len Denton, and at 24 years old, Tony Anthony, the Grapplers and the Dirty White Boys.
Well, and Len Denton, of course, still to this day is synonymous with the name the Grappler. Len started working as the Grappler. I think did he start in Southwest down in San Antonio? I know he had a run there.
Mid-South.
Maybe they both did.
I think it was
Mid-South. It was Mid-South as the Grappler. And then Len kept the Grappler for, and was a booker and top guy in Portland for Don Owen, and still lives out there to this day. Where Tony Anthony came in is Tony's from Knoxville, and he had kind of broken in, and I can't remember again, was it Southwest or was it Memphis first and then they went down there, but they did the Grapplers tag team. I know they were together in Memphis in 83 before I left there, and then I think, didn't they unmask them and they became the Dirty White Boys briefly? Then Len went back to being the Grappler and Tony stuck with the Dirty White Boy. Basic gist of the thing. And I don't know, in this company for this list in 1984, you could put either guy on it, although they both prospered later on.
Jim, 25 years old, Faxon Tim Horner.
Faxon Tim Horner and his fake white lightning bolt. Yeah, I mean, it was Tim, and it was 1984, and look at the names that we've just gone through.
And one final name, Jim, and apologies to anyone who's going to cry and complain about no All Japan women names on here. I apologize, I had limited time. But 27 years old, Leilani Kai.
I'm glad you put her on here, because Lonnie was, I think everybody has kind of, well, I say everybody, there's kids that never saw her, but I think anybody who's got a grip on the 80s female wrestling scene, everybody pretty much thought Lonnie was the best worker of the bunch of. And also, she loved the business. She was very dedicated. You can't use the same criteria that we were using for any of the guys, for any girls in the 80s, because except for Wendy, because of the unique situation with Cyndi Lauper and Vince and the whole thing, none of the girls were put in money drawing positions. But Leilani, along with Judy Martin, were kind of considered the two girls at that point in time that were the best workers of the bunch in the United States.
Well, with that, Jim, that is a list of many of the wrestling stars, the regular employed wrestlers of 1984.
Incredible talent in their 20s, already headlining big buildings, making major television shows, had programs that people are still doing documentaries about. And that's just the guys in their 20s, because I hate to be a spoiler, but the list of the guys in their 30s is longer.
Well, again, we're at an interesting time now. A lot of the top stars appear to be in their early to mid 40s. A lot of guys are still active in their 50s. The 30s, there may not be as many stars as there used to be. In the 20s, when we did that list, there were a few obvious ones: Bron Breakker, Rhea Ripley, MJF. And then there were a lot of names where, like we said at the top of this, they wouldn't have even gone anywhere near the list in 1984. We have all these question marks, and they're all incredible candidates, and we have a list of no-brainers.
And when we get into the 30s, not to play spoiler or anything, but we're going to have to deal with the likes of the Ric Flairs, Dusty Rhodeses, Andre the Giants type of fucking names that are still in their 30s.
Well,
yeah.
We will return shortly after this short commercial timeout.
You know, Brian, as I look back, I see all those names. They were bright-eyed. They were bushy-tailed. They're in their 20s. They're a bunch of Utes, just a bunch of Utes just beginning their lives. But a lot of them, unfortunately, didn't have a good backup plan. Didn't have something to fall back on when they got out of the wrestling business. And as a result of that, met with some misery. Can you imagine if they'd all started thinking, what am I going to do after wrestling? I know I'm going to have Shopify build me a business, a website, and a marketing team, and a commerce expert that can help me sell everything from cookies to fucking auto parts on the internet that hadn't been invented yet. Maybe that's the problem. Well, now we've got the capability and ability, Brian, now that we've got an internet, to go with Shopify and make money, whereas you didn't have before. So you should always take advantage of these modern space-age technologies while they exist. And if the people out there go to shopify.com/JCE, they will see in front of them the promised land. Shopify can build your website, run your website, market your product, get your brand name out, take all the money and give you some of it. If you're ready to sell, well, and you need money and you're ready for Shopify. And how desperate are you, ladies and gentlemen? You want to start right now? Well, they can start you right now with a $1 a month trial period. That's what they'll do, so that they will show you all the services they can provide for you, and they'll get you hooked. And then you got Shopify on your back. You're not going to be able to do anything without them. Brian, Shopify is one of the safest addictions you can have, because that means that you're addicted to money, the mean green stuff, the ching, I should say, of commercial commerce, of cash going into a box. Ching-a-ling-a-ling. Shopify.com/JCE. Sign up for a $1 a month trial period. Whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, or even the 60s, you can still make some money, unlike all of us back in the dark ages of the 80s when they didn't have an internet. Shopify.com/JCE.
That's right, Jim. They power our online store, and they can power yours. We trust them. You can too. Shopify.com/JCE.
You just like to say power hour.